Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize it.
So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
Hi, and welcome back. It's another episode of the Koala podcast. And we're up the tree today with a little bit of flu with Jim Tate in the US. And I came across Jim on LinkedIn, and he was writing and commenting on influencers, specifically, I think, YouTube, but we can get into that with regard to psychedelics and cannabis. And we are both of the same thinking that the word influencers are bad enough at the best of times, but when they get involved in this sort of stuff, they, my belief is they're a bit downright dangerous, actually, and they just tend to, they're always selling something. Everybody's always selling something, and I think with psychedelics, we have to be a bit careful about that. Jim, welcome to the show. Let's have a bit of background about yourself first, rather than what made you write that. I mean, you just said in the preamble that you have your own podcast. Have you got
absolutely.
a media background, or what is it?
I've got a background in technology, but I've done a lot of writing, journalism around information technology. But in terms of psychedelics, I was born in 1950, Sean. So in 1967,
you're looking a lot better than me this evening for somebody born in 1950.
That
was 14 years after you, and you're looking a lot better.
I've had some good coffee already this morning. Yeah. In 1967, here in the States, something called the Summer of Love, which was probably the peak of the hippie psychedelic era. And I was 17 years old. That's the first time I encountered psychedelics, and I've been thinking about them and an observer of the scene ever since. And of course, back in those days, there were chemists and people. There were no retreat centers. There was no thinking of set and setting. There was no integration. There was really no intention. It was just kind of wide open, which had its own amount of danger.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was the same for us in the UK in the 80s, where, of course, not only did it, it wasn't trendy, as well as the fact that it had no sort of backup. So you had to sort of, make your own rules, basically. And people who came along with you did the same thing.
That's right. Well, and so kind of fast forward to where we are now, where psychedelics, in a lot of ways, has become an industry, not only with corporations and pharmaceutical companies being involved, but also just the retreat centers and I guess they call themselves facilitators. And, I'm really interested also, Sean, in the history of psychedelics, indigenous use, where psychedelics were used as part of a community. And so, I don't want to come down too hard on the retreat centers because they serve a purpose. I've talked to many of the people who run retreat centers. Their heart may be in the good place, but the whole paradigm has become very tainted. And so in particular, whether we want to call them journalists or influencers or gonzo journalists or whatever, when they write or talk about psychedelics, it's often just one side of the story. I give you an example. Here in the U.S., last year, 2025 was kind of the year of ibogaine. Incredible, fantastic press. Ibogaine's a very powerful psychedelic. Seems to have just really wonderful potential for opioid addiction and other kind of things. But there's not too much reporting on the other side, the cardiac toxicity, things like that. And so even under the best circumstances, recently at one of the best ibogaine clinics in the world in Mexico, death occurred last month. And so, these things can happen. And so, but I've talked to many of these retreat centers and they're very quick, even if their heart's in a good place, it's a business. And so they have to keep their mattresses, full of people. And so when I'm frequently offered incentives, if I refer somebody to a retreat center of 4% or 7%, and uh, and these are from reliable people doing good work, but it just shows how
And are
the
these all
Tate.
retreats outside the US or are they retreats inside the US?
Well, definitely outside the U.S.,
Yeah.
but it wouldn't surprise me if it happened inside the U.S. And again, these are the more or less above ground ones I'm talking about. And so, it's if somebody's offering to pay you, whether it is a retreat center in the U.S. or anywhere else, if you're offered, if you're a journalist, use it in the or influence, and you're invited down for a free 5-day stay, you're going to be treated specially, and you're going to have a tendency to kind of spin your narrative, and at the very least, if somebody's reporting on a retreat center or any other aspects of this, if they're receiving any benefit at all, that should be reported. At the very least, I've read influencers who say, "Well, it's just an energy exchange. I get a great retreat, and I report on them." And so these are such powerful
Well,
disruptors.
that's always my worry is, people are putting the stops in front of cannabis the whole way, and it doesn't seem to stop. But
Right,
when they're discussing psychedelics, everybody seems very gung ho, but nobody's really accepting how powerful these compounds are and how they can affect, people's minds. You and I went through this stuff doing it ourselves when we were younger, so we're sort of fully aware of that. But the more people that are selling a service, the more customers, patients, however you want to describe them, are
right.
going to get damaged by this, aren't they?
Well, and it's become an industry, certainly in a lot of different ways. And you can just go on LinkedIn and search for psychedelic facilitators. Boy, you're going to get a long list. Traditionally, to be or they try and call themselves a shaman.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at what it takes to become a true shaman in the true sense of the world, it's not a online course or a 30
Well,
day thing.
it's a 3 to 5 generational family thing, isn't it? So I mean,
That is exactly it, and it's not a one and done kind of situation. So I'm certainly worried about that side of it, and the concept of certainly in the U.S., probably in the U.K., probably a lot of places, people become middlemen, and so in a lot of retreat centers. The concept of setting intention, or maybe even more important, integration, is not part of what you're paying for. Maybe they'll do some follow-up Zooms for integration, whatever the heck that means these days.
well,
Uh,
it means nothing. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, and again,
yeah.
like you and me and others of a certain vintage, we know that we know that things kick in 40 years later or 35 years later without us being aware.
Well,
So, like
you know,
this idea of a medical faux telecommunications follow up a week and a half later to say, "Oh yeah, are you feeling fine?" or something is is just
well,
ridiculous, I think.
you know, uh, um, psychedelics are great disruptors. They literally should put you in ontological shock. That the way you thought and way you constructed reality is not the way it is. Well, if you go through an experience and come out the other side and realize, oh, everything I thought was true is not true, a couple of Zoom calls,
That's not
I
going
don't
to help,
know.
is it? No.
It's not going to help. It's really not going to help. And so, I just actually wrote a thing on the fact that psychedelics cannot be forced to stay in their own lane. You can try to medicalize it here, which, was the big Trojan horse. If we can just get it MDMA approved to use for anxiety or PTSD, then we can open up the floodgates and we'll be living in the Garden of Eden.
To
Uh,
which I always respond, has nobody ever read any of their Huxley? I keep sending people back to 20th century novelists because
You know,
they discovered this stuff prior to the Second World War, and some of it in the 50s, obviously. And it's just bizarre
yes,
because all this knowledge is already known within scientific literature, but also if you look within popular culture and serious writers. But people seem to have just thrown that into the ether. It doesn't even exist. So we're sort of in this sort of Dharma wheel of constant cycle
right.
happening.
Uh, Journalists slash influencers uh, can definitely raise their voice more by the promotion and promise of psychedelics than objective reporting. I don't claim to be an objective journalist. I'm very opinionated about things.
Well,
But
I am too, because
yeah,
if you played that game which they want you to play, nothing ever changes. That's the one thing I've learned with both psychedelics and cannabis,
yes,
with regard to
yeah,
talking about law, regulation. You know, they want you to follow their narrative because then their narrative is reality. But as we're discovering pretty quickly, the narrative that's been created for both these sets of compounds and all the other ones that have been put in the illegal bag. You know, it's just a bit of a joke, really. But how to not think, have other people not think you're shouting at the wind is the hardest thing, I think.
there's been a rise. Something else I've been thinking about, Sean Lady, is just from a sociological perspective, the rise of a psychedelic aristocracy. We don't have elders anymore, or the very few elders, uh, and but we certainly have these folks, and maybe they did a lot of great stuff in the '60s or '70s, but they are trotted around to every conference. They're put on these cruise ships to the Antarctic, where you can fly it on your private jet, give $24,000, be on a boat with some chemist from the '60s. I think, what does that have to do with psychedelics? The potential of psychedelics. So, in some way, it's to be expected. We're the global north. We're used to colonization. We're used to monetizing everything, sensationalizing everything. So it's not a surprise, but psychedelics and and whatever they mean are much bigger than any of this. And so there's an attempt to kind of constrain them to their medicine just for this or for that, as opposed to something that really tears down some very deep psychic walls in people.
Well, exactly. I mean,
Uh,
look, whenever I have these conversations with lawyers, because obviously I speak to a lot of lawyers, and
right, I know.
they do psychedelic work, e.g., their clients are, churches or companies, but
Yes.
the conversation always ends up to them, because most have obviously used these compounds at some point in their
Hmm.
lives. To them, that's not really the conversation about being a psychedelics lawyer. It's like, how is psychedelics going to slowly over time reinvent the way that we think about law, and I presume the way that we think about medicine, and the way that we think about economics, and the way that and nobody really seems to, as you say, it's all about retreats, people's personal, it's actually all, I read a lot of Kesey, and it was all about getting
Right.
rid of the ego. But this generation, it seems to be like building the ego to Timothy Leary plus 100, and nothing about how the compounds influence the way that society can start thinking about itself in other ways. I mean, to me, that's the most useful.
To me, you're right, Sean. That's the true potential, and really, if there is a message from psychedelics, that's the message that should be heard.
But do
One
you
thing I've
think people are
noticed,
do you think people are interested in? Are there people interested in that the message tells itself? And if so, how do we give them power to talk about the message rather than people talking about themselves and businesses that they're flogging?
Sean, I do what I can do in my writing and in I have a podcast also called In the Revival. And so the people that I interview, trying to elevate their voice, primarily. I mean, that's, but here's one thing that I've kind of noticed. And so certainly in the US, for 40 years or 35 years, the MAPS organization, pushed, they figured, well, let's get MDMA approved by the FDA. Of course, that hadn't happened yet. But, to treat disease and not really talking about the potential for psychedelics to increase creativity or,
Which
whatever
for
that
me
means,
is
things like
the
that.
most, I always entered these conversations mainly through music because when I was young, and that's and that
Right.
allowed you, music and writing, basically the two areas that allowed me to
Yeah.
explore this. And all I see with people like Maps is, obviously he was thinking in a certain way in the 80s, but these huge
Yes.
conferences and all these people running around in suit. I mean, they're the sort of things I'd rather die than go to. So I have no idea what they're actually
Well,
like on the ground.
I'm going to be the devil's advocate of that because I like to go to those.
Yeah,
And because I want to see the state of the above ground industry. And also there's some people that I want to listen to that are going to be there. But one thing that I've noticed, is the retreats. There's starting to be retreats that are not for finding yourself or treating your anxiety, but retreats to make you more productive and efficient. And I think, my gosh, you know,
brave,
that's the
brave,
exact
brave new
opposite
world,
of psychedelics.
brave new world, brave new world every time.
Yeah, that's it. That's 1984. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
Brave New World.
all those, as I said before, I think all those writers really understood pretty quickly in the game what technology and capital could do to psychedelics before they could imagine the type of technology and capital that now exists to do whatever it is they're going to do. Which you know, I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on the people like Thiel and Musk? Yeah, they've all, them and their cronies, so to speak. They've all dabbled with this sort of stuff. It's obviously fired their ego up into that we
Well,
can run the
what,
world. Do you
what,
think that they will have an effect on the way that it it's thought about?
I think they are. There's some large organizations, certainly here in the U.S., that are privately funded to affect policy and what's promoted. Um, but you kind of mentioned Elon Musk, and I think it's pretty well known. He is a very big personal advocate of ketamine, and
Yep.
he has said that. And certainly, ketamine has a lot of potential, but it has a lot of potential for abuse because you can do ketamine every day.
Well, the
And
ketamine first came along in the early 1990s when I was going out nightclubbing. So I was aware of all of that because
vitamin K.
it was there was a period. I grew up in England in this sort of that very famous sort of acid house sort of period, and so the MDMA was fantastic till about 1991, and then the ketamine started coming in after that. So you could, years before anybody else was speaking about it, you could see the damage that it could do to people if there was no sort of regulation around it, and that's sort of been quietly, I noticed, quietly hidden in the industry side of things. But I mean, you only ever need to look at nightclub life over the last 50 years to know what happens with these things when they get used to excess or they get badly produced.
Exactly. Something else has been fascinating to watch over the last 60 plus years is the psychedelic chemist in the 1960s would be given double life sentences,
Yeah.
buried, key thrown away. Picard's probably the greatest example, although he was finally let out after over 20 years in a federal prison. No history of violent crime, anything like that at all. But now, if you're a psychedelic chemist above ground, the potential for wealth is amazing. There's a company here, Gilgamesh, who just one of their compounds has just been licensed or purchased for $1.2 billion. And so just the switch that has occurred in the reason behind the whole river of psychedelics is so different now. But no matter how it's tried to be constrained or anything else, or analogs created so they can be patented, psychedelics will, I don't see that they will ever be able to be made, quote, safe. They're always going to be great disruptors. So there's going to be this, whoever controls the above ground, there's always going to be the underground. Here in the U.S., the first state to kind of do some breakthroughs was Oregon. Of course, it's very bureaucratic and structured, but that's the way.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about.
Colorado's taking a couple more steps.
Because I've spoken to some of those facilitators, and they're pretty good people, very intelligent.
Yes, they are.
But
right.
But they're literally putting their finger in the dam against the flood of, because there's only 19 of them or 32 of them or something, and you have the same in Colorado. I mean, there's literally a few hundred of these really well trained people who can only provide services for people who are quite wealthy, in a very limited way. So it seems, I mean, it's great that they exist, but how do you think these states are going to cope with this future flood?
Yeah, to me, Colorado is much more interesting. I think it's called Natural Plant Act, Natural Medicine Act, where adults can possess and share certain psychedelics. That's a couple of steps beyond what's happening in Oregon over the last few years. And so I think that's going to kind of feed very strongly an underground where you don't have to meet state regulations to be legal, which is the case in Oregon. We're just going to have to see how it plays out. But again, somebody who calls themselves a shaman and has the right hat and the right feather and the right sage. And let me tell you, I'm all for that. I've been in ceremonies, and there's some comfort around that kind of stuff, and the right kind of music. I'm a fan. I'm a fan of a safe container. I think a safe container is important. We certainly didn't have them in the '60s. We would take LSD and go to the mall, and talk about a bad trip. I guess it was a bad trip. I don't know. Things are just so different now. At least there are safe containers starting to open up, but I don't know if the majority of the facilitators really have the experience or the ability to follow up with folks. I mean, psychedelics have, for thousands of years, it was a community thing. You lived in a village or a tribe or something with the people who were shamans, and it influenced you, and everybody knew. And
and they said what you could do when you did it, and it's normally part of some sort of growing up or moving within that community, wasn't it? So it's part of the social fabric of the changes to you as a human being within that community.
Absolutely. So again, kind of go back to your phrase and quoting the book, Brave New World. The part that continues to worry me is that the immense power of these compounds is not being respected.
I'm with you 100%. And people,
and there's danger in that.
Nobody's saying this. I mean, they're so powerful, and yet nobody wants to say that you have to be a little bit careful.
And one thing you kind of referenced earlier, Sean, is the fact that psychedelics impact the ego so much they can inflate the ego. And people think, well, I'm really in touch with some divine stuff, but everybody else isn't. I mean, if you see, and again, it depends on how you look at it, but if you see the divinity in yourself, I'm hoping you're seeing it in other people too. And it's
Yeah,
not you that
well,
is
but
unique and
as you
special.
know, Homo sapiens, they're not always think how you'd like them to think. So I think it's a 50-50 or even a bigger percentage of people who actually see this. You know, I think because if when people like you and I use these things, because it was outside the norm, um, you had these little communities and you understood one another and you sort of had to, work your way through these things. Now, okay, it's not normal, but it's sort of it's a rite of passage for a lot of kids or people in their 20s or now people in business who wouldn't have otherwise even entertained the thought of it. It's a bit, I'm thinking of it like tattoos at the moment, and it's a bit more powerful than a tattoo.
One thing that's new in the last few years, when I say last few years, last 5 years, I guess, is microdosing. Boy, that is a topic people have to write about it. They say it changed their life. Clinical trials don't say
Well,
that,
their clinical
but
trials are saying nothing, basically, aren't they?
right, they are. So there may be something there beyond placebo. These are such powerful uh, compounds that I would not be surprised if they do something. Below the level of clinical experience. They may well do something, but there are so many microdosing courses, and everybody's an expert on it and encouraging people to microdose. There's hype behind it. I'm all for hype if what's behind the hype is real. But there's certainly a lot of influencers who are constantly singing the praises of microdosing. And again, it might be real, but they act like they're convinced it's real. And, so
Well,
I
yeah,
can't wait to see where we are. Sean, I can't wait to see where we are in 10 years.
well,
Where
exactly.
is this going?
Uh, I, it's going to be really interesting because, as I said, a lot of people seem to worry less about this moving forward than cannabis moving forward. I would automatically say cannabis
Exactly.
first, work out how you deal with that one plant in lots of its myriad of ways. And that might be a good template to make you understand psychedelic compounds that are natural, but also because of technology, technology is going to invent hundreds, if not thousands, of these compounds over the next 10 years. And
Absolutely.
and
Yep.
cannabis is the great way to show us how to make some really simple rules to start with. Otherwise, we're going to be out of control.
You were raised in the UK. Where were you raised?
Yeah, I was raised in the UK. I mean, I was born in Australia, but raised in the UK.
Yeah, where were
On
you?
the south coast, in a small place called Chichester, near Brighton.
Okay. Yeah, I've been there. I
Yeah.
went with there with my parents. One thing I'm fascinated by is indigenous use of compounds. I would love to know in Australia were psychedelics native and used 500 years ago.
Well,
Do you
that
have
I
any?
don't know. I mean,
I want to
they,
know.
they keep that knowledge to themselves because they're smart
Good,
guys. There's a lot of knowledge that they're not giving to anybody, and I
good.
and I think you'll find that most uh, I would suggest that Australian Aboriginal society probably used um, some sort of compounds in the thousands of years ago, but the way that they are with nature, I literally think they didn't need it anymore. It, it
Okay.
it's
Well,
but again, look, they have a lot of knowledge and they know that they've made the mistake in sharing that knowledge before. So
yes,
there's a lot of communities throughout the country who I don't think, they just don't tell the white fella anything, basically. That's the most sensible approach to take.
it is. We can see what happened in Mexico with Lawson and Hoffman going down in
Yeah.
the 50s and 60s and taking that knowledge. And it's fascinating to watch what's happening with ibogaine. Whether there's going to be any reciprocal action towards Cabone, and that they have maintained around ibogaine.
I mean, I was just reading an article just the other day about some Australian scientists who are looking at wattle, which is an acacia, and they're saying that
Yes.
actually the DMT that you can produce from certain wattle plants in Australia put everybody else in the shade. So who knows? That
Well,
white scientists and are discovering this stuff now through research, but it's probably common knowledge amongst these communities, but they're not. I say they're not going to
well,
share.
I'm glad you brought that up. DMT is everywhere.
Yeah.
It's in the human body. It's in so many plants. It's relatively easy to distill a plant, some mimosas and wattles you're mentioning. Wow, what a powerful compound that is.
Well, look,
Go ahead.
I'd love to carry on talking, but we're almost out of time already.
Okay.
We're down to the
Okay.
last 5 minutes because we could both go on forever. And
Yes, we could.
I've been told by my partner that I'm not allowed to speak too much, or else I'll lose my voice again. Look, thank you very much for being on the Karma Koala podcast. Let's get you back later in the year to talk just another general chat about psychedelics and maybe another aspect. But I'm really interested in that connection between capital and psychedelics at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how it's going to influence society in the US and globally.
Sean, thanks for the work you're doing, and keep the faith, man.
Oh yeah,
Keep the faith.
I always keep the faith. You got to keep the faith.
Okay.
Thank you
Right.
very much for being on the show.
Good to see you. I enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, great, Barry, a reefer.